right, our final speaker today, Lauren Steely, is a senior resource specialist and data scientist with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Her work focuses on the science and economics of agricultural water use in the Colorado River basin. She received a MS from UC Santa Barbara, where she participated in the Sustainable Water Markets program at the Bren School of Environmental Science and Management. So thank you. Thank you. It's this one, right? No, that's one.
Yeah, that one right there. Last time.
I'm gonna let you do it.
I'll try. There we go. All right, I know lunch awaits, so I will jump right into it. I think most people here are probably familiar with the idea of the irrigation efficiency paradox, but just to state it briefly, it's this idea that as you increase the irrigation efficiency, sometimes you can actually end up increasing the consumptive use of your fields. So why does this happen? Two reasons. You could have an increase in the irrigated acreage that is being farmed now that you no longer need as much water for each field. Or two, you could have an increase in the crop yield itself now that you're irrigating more optimally. And so that could actually increase the ET per acre. And so for the purposes here, I'm just going to very simply define efficiency as ETA over applied water. So in this presentation, we're just going to ask, what actually happens to ET after you have an irrigation efficiency upgrade? And I'll show you two examples. And these examples are going to come from the Palo Verde Irrigation District. So this is a district that lies along the Colorado River in southeastern California. It's just north of Yuma and Imperial. And a few quick facts about PVID. First of all, they've got the most senior water rights in the lower basin. Metropolitan also has a number of programs with them. We've got a fallowing program that we've had since 2005. We also own about 21,000 acres within the district of that land that we're leasing out to farmers, where we're really trying to experiment as to how can we incentivize growers to reduce their consumptive water use. Another thing about PVID, it is one of the best places in the world to grow alfalfa. You've got over 300 sunny days a year. You're getting 12 to 13 cuttings. Each cutting is 10 to 14, increasingly 15, maybe 16 tons per acre. So it is an excellent place for growing alfalfa, and we'll be looking at some of those alfalfa fields in a moment. It's primarily surface irrigation. Canals bring the water to the fields, and then it's flooded onto the fields, which is quite challenging to measure compared to groundwater, right? And then the last sort of interesting thing is you're kind of in the floodplain of the Colorado River here. So your groundwater is very shallow, and you have return flow credits. So we can pretty much assume that most of the water that's not actually used by the crop, all of that deep perk, that tailwater runoff, gets back to the river in some fashion, and a lot of that is actually measured. And that's actually very nice because it means we can kind of ignore it, but it leads to this question of, from a river accounting perspective, we don't really care about applied water. We want to know what is the consumptive use of interventions that we're going to do. So traditional flood irrigation, of course, massive amounts of water, 24 to 48 hour irrigations, if not longer, are very common in PVID. You get over irrigation on certain parts of your field, which can burn your crop and lead to yield loss. The water is very difficult to measure. And you get a lot of field evaporation off the surface from these really long irrigations. So ET is kind of a natural choice for us in measuring water use here because it's one of the best things we have, and it gets directly at that consumptive use issue that's really important here. So there's been a lot of proposals around different types of efficiency that could work in these types of districts, and these are some of the ones that we're currently looking at. But we've always had the same question. You might reduce the applied water, but what's actually going to happen to the ET with these technologies? All right, so case study 1. So this is a grower in PVID who upgraded their alfalfa field from flood irrigation to this high efficiency surface irrigation. This is made by a company called Rubicon Water, Australian company. And these are pretty neat little devices because they give you really good efficiency with surface irrigation. And they do that by flashing the water very rapidly onto the field, shortening up those irrigation times, presumably reducing some of that field evaporation, and delivering a very optimal amount of water to each part of your field. And so they do that with sort of irrigation, flow control, and everything's automated. And as a side benefit, you get really good gold standard applied water measurement as the water flows through these meters. So now for the first time, we've got a really good measure of applied water on some of these fields. All right, so let's look at some data. Yes, we've talked about that. Okay. Applied water use. So we've got on the left in the light blue, we've got 12 years of applied water measurements from the old traditional Zenhero hand measurements. So consider all of these have very large error bars. I have tried to adjust them based on what we think that error may be. So I've adjusted them down a little bit, but take it with a grain of salt. And then on the right, in the dark blue, we've got the meter data, which we think is very, very good. Probably better than 5%, maybe 2.5% accuracy. And you can see the crops on the bottom, and on the y-axis, acre foot per acre. So if we just look at the alfalfa, it's pretty clear, right? Dramatic reduction in applied water use of a quarter to a third, just looking at the alfalfa, going from 7 to 8 feet of water to 5 to 6 feet of water on some of these fields. So it's very dramatic. It's a great story for these efficiency devices, but let's look at the ET. Does anyone want to guess what the ET is going to look like? Yeah. Rick knows. Rick knows exactly. Okay, so here's the ET. And of course, we would like to have more data going back further, but we've got it back to 2016. So we really don't see any reduction in ET, number one. The ET that we do see appears to mostly be driven, of course, by crop selection. So those 2 years where it's a little bit lower, those were years where we had teff and wheat rather than alfalfa. When you do have alfalfa, then the first year has the highest ET, and we see this on alfalfa fields all over PVID. You plant a new stand, you get the highest quality, the best yield, and the highest ETs, and then it goes down a little bit every year after that. And so then we've had this question of like, well, if we're shortening our irrigation times, why don't we see a reduction in field evaporation in the ET data? And my guess is that we're getting higher yields with the more efficient technology. And so the E might be going down, but the T is going up, and that's either canceling it out, or maybe the T is going up more than the E is going down. Here's both of these together just so you can sort of get a sense of the efficiency. And so we're going from like 55 to 75% efficient under traditional flood to kind of 86 to 98. And here's where I find these numbers a little bit hard to believe that you would get that high in efficiency from any kind of surface irrigation, which makes me suspect that this is the metric model that we're using, by the way. And while I do think it is the best choice for this particular environment, it makes me wonder if maybe we're getting ETs that are a little bit too high here, just on the basis of these efficiency numbers. Nonetheless, a very good testimonial for the technology in terms of applied water use. All right, quick intermission just to talk about some other ways that we're using the ET data before we go to the second case study. Man, the daily ET data, even with all the things we've talked about yesterday and today, the limited overpass dates, the interpolation, even with all that, it is still awesome, all the things you can see going on your fields with the daily data. So this is an alfalfa field. It's one of those super high yield alfalfa fields. You could see every cutting. You could see the drying period. You could see the regrowth. It's really phenomenal. Potentially, you can estimate the yield on your field. You can look at the differences between different crop types. And you can even, it might be hard to see, I kind of put the reference ET in really faint orange on there. And you can see how in the summer, during the rapid growth period, the alfalfa is actually, it's above reference ET. You're getting like a crop coefficient above 1 during those periods, and then it drops back down again when it gets cut. Then you combine that with your high resolution applied water data from the meters, so you can see every single flood irrigation event that happened on this field, and compare those cumulative curves to the ET, and again, get some measure of efficiency. When we do that on many different fields, we see a lot of variation in the efficiencies, and we think that has to do with differences in the soil types, right? So the sandier fields, you have to put a lot more water on in order to get the same amount of ET compared to the tighter soils. And so we can actually use that as a way to target specific fields for interventions, the fields that are just using a lot more water. Metropolitan's also getting really interested in soil health and soil carbon. And so this is data from a study that we're doing on regenerative agriculture with Chico State University, where they're looking at cover crops, no-till, different regenerative interventions, and how does that improve soil carbon. We've got some flex towers out there. But we've also been looking at those fields with ET, and you can very clearly see the individual cover crop seasons. You can see how most of the water savings of the cover crop is actually coming from the downtime in between the different seasons of the cover crops. And you can compare that to the TEF, conventional crop at the bottom there. And then this is really cool. I loved making this. So this is one of our lessees. This is all 304 of their fields. And even if we knew nothing about the crops on those fields, just looking at the ET alone over these 7 years, you can kind of start to pick out okay, which ones are the alfalfa fields on the top? Which ones are the Sudan grass and the teff and the annual grasses in the middle? And then we've got the idle and the fallow fields at the bottom. And you'll notice that there's actually quite a bit of ET coming off of those fields. My team has had a lot of discussion about what does this mean? Is this an issue with the models? Is this because we're in the floodplain and we've got really shallow groundwater at 10 feet? I'd love to get some thoughts from you folks as to why this is so high. I know other folks have been seeing significant ET on fallow fields, but this is, I think, higher even than many of the other things I've seen today. Okay, I'm going to skip over this for the sake of time. All right, case study 2. This is a sprinkler conversion. So we had one of our growers had a flood irrigated alfalfa field, and note the drain, tailwater drain on the left-hand side there. That's going to be significant later. So they converted that flood irrigated field into this sprinkler, linear sprinkler system that kind of moves back and forth. And if we look at the historical flood irrigated deliveries, they're enormous. This is a field with very sandy ground on the edge of the district where they were putting 20 to 30 feet of water per year on that field just because it took so long to irrigate. The soils were so sandy. So we had very, very low efficiency. In 2017 and 18, parts of those fields were fallowed, so we're going to kind of ignore that period. And then in 2019, we get this conversion to the linear sprinkler system. Water use goes down for a little bit while they convert it. And then we see something very similar to what we saw with the high efficiency surface irrigation. We see this dramatic reduction in applied water. It is a little bit higher because they had to do some moss control in the ditches, so they ran some extra water through there in 2021. But in general, the applied water went way down, and we see the same thing on the ET. We see that the ET has gone up significantly as these fields have become more optimally irrigated. And at the bottom, I've put some yield numbers so you can kind of see why the ET has gone up. This field went from 6.7 tons per acre in 2016, 2015 to 10.2 in 2020, 2021, probably even higher recently. And then here's the most recent data that we have for 2022. Okay, takeaways. You can do irrigation efficiency, have huge reductions in deliveries, but you might get little effect on consumptive use, or consumptive use might even go up. And this means that if you're thinking about irrigation efficiency, the location matters. In PVID, where you've got return flow credits, maybe efficiency doesn't get you much. But in Imperial Valley, someplace where the applied, you're not getting return flows back to the river, efficiency is great there, right? So you have to think about where you're doing the efficiency. And then you really have to look at actual ET. You can't just look at applied water use. And I'm going to put up 3 statements here that I think can be true. It is possible for a grower to reduce applied water without reducing or even increasing their consumptive use. It is possible for a grower to increase crop per drop while still increasing their total consumptive water use. And it's possible to reduce field evaporation while still increasing total ET if the T goes up more than the E goes down. And this could happen if you get an increase in yields on your fields. And of course, it's the crop's demand for water that's the main driver of consumptive use. So you have to focus on interventions that really target that consumptive use, like deficit irrigation, crop shifting, those things. Okay, let me sort of skip past all this. Just a really brief plug here. I'm a big R user. I really wanted to find ways to automate calls to the OpenET API in my R scripts. So I built an R package. It's up on GitHub if you'd like it. I'll have the QR code will be on the next slide as well. You can download it off of GitHub. It only has a few endpoints implemented currently, but I think it's got most of the most common use cases covered. And then finally, just a call for collaborators. If you're interested in ET, soil moisture, soil carbon, we are very interested in using our 21,000 acres as a model and a showcase for what kinds of things can be done in the lower basin in these types of irrigation districts. At this point, we have almost, I would call it a digital twin of PVID. We've got crop data that's being updated multiple times per year. We've got a geospatial model of the irrigation network. We've got soil moisture data, of course, OpenET. We've got great ET data. So there's lots of things. And most importantly, we have growers who are excited about doing projects with us and who we can compensate for taking on risk, which is a great thing. So if you've got ideas, I'd love to chat more. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lauren. We are running up against lunch, but I would like to open the floor if we have one question that we can address, please.
Could you give us a brief summary of what happened with the NDRIP trial?
I cannot, because that is still in progress. I can tell you what I suspect, though. I suspect that NDRIP will be really good at reducing the field evaporation compared to the high efficiency surface irrigation, especially compared to the sprinkler, right? So I suspect that even if you get a yield bump from NDRIP, you might end up reducing that field evaporation enough that your consumptive use actually goes down, or at the very least stays steady. That's definitely something that we want to study. And I'm interested in ideas and how can we sort of differentiate that evaporative from that transpiration component. I'm not really sure how we're going to do that yet, but great question, because we are starting up an NDRIP pilot in PVID as we speak.
Great. I want to thank all the speakers today. Excellent set of talks. Please reach out to them during lunch if you have additional questions. So thank you.